Is America actually losing the war? Or could it? How is Iran able to do this? But President Trump says they've been bombed into submission. We've knocked out their navy, their military in it all forms. We've knocked out just about everything there is, including their leadership. But the Iranians are still launching attacks, setting ships on fire and drone bombing oil facilities. You can be very damaged and have a bloody nose, but still be capable of being a big nuisance. So could Iran actually win this war? Could its cheap drones make it too expensive for America and Israel to fight? The US talks about what victory means, but what does defeat look like? Here's the breakdown with Tyler Anderson. America is relentlessly bombarding Iran, hitting 5,500 Iranian targets since the war broke out. They had thousands of missiles, 8,000 missiles. We got many of them before they got to launch. They have drones all over the place. We got many now. We're knocking out the drone plants. As you know, they started talking about mines, so we hit 28 mine ships as of this moment. But Trump's intense military action comes at a cost. The Pentagon estimates that the first 6 days of the war have already cost the US $11.3 billion. Despite this massive outlay, Iran is still fighting back for a fraction of the cost. They're using drones in the air and the sea. They're cheap and easy to build, and they explode when they hit their targets. And while they can be taken out, they're 10 times more expensive to stop than they are to make. That gives Iran an advantage time. The longer the war goes on, the more their opponents have to spend to keep themselves safe. At least 150 US troops have been wounded in the war so far, and Iran has successfully strangled the global oil supply by striking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, burning the fuel that the rest of the world needs. They are now threatening to double the price of oil. So the US will have to decide how much money it's willing to lose to keep fighting this war. Thanks, Tyler. One of the most surreal things about this war is how it's been talked about. Take a look at this video that was posted by the official White House account. Here comes the heat from the USA boom. All pins down. What a strike. That's right. Who do you think you are? That's the actual American government posting that. And right at the same time that they appear to be joking about how much they've destroyed. As we speak though, Iran is blowing up ships and oil refineries across the region. So what's going on? Let's bring in someone who knows more about modern warfare than nearly anyone. Journalist Shashank Joshi, defense editor at The Economist magazine. The Trump administration is saying that it's taken out all Iranian capacity to fire missiles and everything is. Is that really true? Well, I think you've got to consider three things. One is having the ability to make missiles. The other one is having the missiles themselves. And the third one is being able to fire them. And I think it's true that, in these airstrikes by America and Israel, over the past 2 weeks they've done significant damage to all three of those things. To the capacity to make missiles, to the stockpiles, and to the ability to get those launchers out there in the open and to fire them before you're detected and bombed by an American or Israeli plane above you. They've lost probably the Iranians half their launchers, so a huge loss for the Iranians. Significant numbers of missiles, probably in the thousands. However, it is still true though. The Iranians are getting drones away. And we've seen that continuing to fire against the Gulf Arab states. I've seen videos of a drone hitting a building in Dubai in the last 24 hours, and it's also true that the Iranians are probably holding back some of their missiles, thinking we are not going to fire these now because we can't, but we'll keep them in reserve so that we can keep up this occasional firing for perhaps another couple of weeks. If the war goes on, so it is basically not true that Iran's missile capacity has been destroyed. There is still some left. If you just listen to Donald Trump, you would think that Iran had been totally pulverized. If you just watch the White House, these bombastic videos they put out, that's what you'd think. Is that the reality? I think it is true that Iran has been pummeled really badly. They've obviously lost their supreme leader. They've lost their head of their defense ministry, their Revolutionary Guards, which is like their special elite military force, and they have seen massive bombing across missile sites, nuclear sites against Revolutionary Guard bases, police bases, intelligence bases, and on and on and on. But fundamentally, the regime is still standing. It's still there. You still have a new supreme leader who's in place. The son of the last one, he's called Mojtaba Khamenei. You've got a revolutionary guard that's still in place. They are still capable, ultimately, of making life difficult for their neighbours. In particular, disrupting the flow of oil out of the Persian Gulf, out of a choke point that they control, called the Strait of Hormuz. In having that minimal capability to keep causing chaos, they can cause global economic turmoil. Despite all the damage that's been done to their military capabilities. And for now, that's enough to give them quite a bit of leverage. So America has the firepower. But Iran can set fire still, all across the region, and really choke global trade. That's right, I mean, you can be a very weak actor. You can be very damaged and have a bloody nose, but still be capable of being a big nuisance. An extreme nuisance to the world economy. And if you want another example of this, we could look back perhaps a year or two to the Houthis, who were a rebel group based in Yemen, supported by Iran, and they were really not a very advanced group. They were a rebel group, they controlled lots of Yemen. They were not very sophisticated, but they were able to fire missiles at shipping through the Red Sea. That caused effectively a blockage in the Red Sea. And despite weeks of bombing by the United States, they were still able to keep firing these missiles. Occasionally, I think the important thing to remember here is you don't need to destroy every ship coming through the Strait of Hormuz. You just need to destroy one, to make it prohibitively risky for all the others to say, hang on a minute, I'm not going to go through that route. And so you can get a lot done with very, very minimal firepower. That's the lesson. I think so. Is it that Donald Trump didn't know that Iran could do this in the Strait of Hormuz? Or that he did know and didn't think it would happen? Or they didn't have a plan? Well, we can never quite peer into the mind of the US president. He changes his mind a lot. He's very unpredictable. He says one thing at breakfast and the other thing by lunchtime. So I can't say for sure. But my suspicion is he thought that he would be able to pummel Iran so badly that by this point perhaps they would have done a deal. Perhaps they would have been paralyzed. I don't think he necessarily factored in that if Iran felt its back was to the wall, that they had no other choice. They were cornered, that they would take the rest of the region down with them. They would try to destroy oil refineries, and production plants and export plants, and gas facilities across the Persian Gulf. And I think that they had little left to lose. If you're going to be toppled anyway, why not try to do all you can to say, I will take you down with me? I think that's what we are seeing with Iran and America. It's its inability at least to plan for that. For example, by not having enough mine-sweeping ships in the region, ready to take off these mines that Iran has said it has laid. I think that does speak to some very, very poor military planning and very poor political preparation from the Trump administration. But of course, anyone who knows anything about the Trump administration knows that we don't normally associate the words careful planning and real thoughtfulness with these people. America has got bogged down in wars before, hasn't it? Vietnam, Iraq, just explain how there might be some parallels with those conflicts. Well, America's fought, of course, many wars in its history, and in the last 40 years it's had some associated with long, protracted military campaigns, from which it has struggled to get decisive results, and has had to stay there for years without achieving much. And, of course, Vietnam, the US invasion of Vietnam in the 1960s is the paradigmatic case of that, eventually leaving and the North Vietnamese rebels, the Viet Cong, taking over the country in humiliating fashion for the United States as they were airlifting their people off the top of the embassy with helicopters. And then, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 to topple Saddam Hussein. The invasion of Afghanistan 2 years before that to topple the Taliban, who were sheltering Al-Qaeda, a terrorist group that conducted the terrorist attacks of 9/11 against New York and Washington. And both of those were very successful military campaigns at the outset, toppling those groups. But America ended up then placing hundreds of thousands of forces on the ground to stabilize those countries. Eventually, of course, leaving Afghanistan again in humiliating fashion in 2021 when the Taliban took over Kabul again. Now what the Trump administration says is, this is not like Iraq or Vietnam, because we are not going to be nation building. We are not trying to build these societies up into democracies. We are not trying to put boots on the ground to stabilize them and stay there for 10 years. This is a limited campaign. And I think that's true. It's not as sprawling and open-ended as Iraq or Vietnam. But it has some similarity, in that it is a campaign that is going on for longer than the Trump administration would want and doesn't necessarily meet all its objectives, in the sense of toppling the Iranian regime, completely eradicating his nuclear program. That what we are learning military power does not solve all your political problems is the other parallel. This idea of asymmetrical warfare and that you might have all the technology and all the firepower, but we can fight back in ways you didn't expect. Right, I think missiles have been a big part of this, which is missiles that Iran is firing, wouldn't have been as accurate and as easy to fire. 30 years ago, Iran fired lots of missiles against Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, unmanned, but they were very inaccurate weapons. They were terror weapons. They were fired against cities. What we are seeing today is that they can strike things more precisely. They've taken out destroyed American radars in Qatar and in Jordan. They've been able to hit American embassies and consulates, and that's been quite effective. And so that asymmetric power to strike back, I think, has been helped by modern technology and the availability of quite good missiles to be operated by armed powers in countries that are not necessarily the biggest or richest militaries in the world. Just finally, Shashank, can Iran actually win this, or at least not lose? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what is victory here? I think nobody can define that very clearly. But from Iran's perspective, they may come out of this very badly bruised. But if they come out of it with their regime intact, the Islamic Republic that took power in that 1979 revolution, with a supreme leader with the Revolutionary Guards, and able to keep their population in control, and saying, if you come out back on the street like you did this year, we will massacre you again. If that is where this ends up, and they can build more missiles, and they can rebuild their nuclear program, that will count as a success for the Iranians. And I think whatever they claim, it will look like a defeat for the Americans. And the Israelis, thanks for breaking that down for us. Shashank, appreciate it, thank you. That's the breakdown, thanks for watching. See you next time.